Hellwig was a merchant. He had inherited a considerable fortune and through various industrial ventures had increased it still further. Delicate in health, he withdrew early from business and lived privately in his little native town. There the name Hellwig carried weight. The family had, from time immemorial, ranked among the most respected. For generations, one bearer of the name had always held some office of honor in the town. The finest garden outside the gates and the large house on the market square had belonged to the Hellwigs for as long as anyone could remember. The house stood on the corner of the square and a steeply rising street, its stately front breaking outward at the corner into a deep bay window. In the two upper stories, white blinds hung behind the panes all the year round. Only 3 times annually, some days before the great church festivals, were they drawn up. Then there was airing and scouring. The great bronze dragon heads along the eaves, which spat the rainwater onto the paving, and the birds flying past, could look in for once upon the hoarded treasures of the old merchant's house. The old-fashioned splendor of the rooms, the tall cabinets of inlaid work with their glittering locks and handles, the damask covers on the sofa cushions and deeply padded chairs, the lofty Venetian mirrors set into the walls, and, in the bedchambers, heaps of guest beds whose linen overthrows breathed a heavy scent of lavender. These rooms were not lived in. It had never been the usage of the Hellwigs to let out part of their spacious dwelling. Silence of a ceremonious kind reigned up there, broken only by a brilliant wedding or a christening, and now and then, in the course of the year, by the ringing step of the mistress of the house, visiting her store of linen, silver, and porcelain. Mrs. Hellwig had entered this house as a child of 12. The Hellwigs were related to her and had taken her in when her parents died in quick succession, leaving their children without means. The girl had a hard time under the old aunt, a severe and proud woman. Hellwig, the only son, pitied her at first. That pity turned to love. His mother strongly opposed the match, and there were fierce scenes. But in the end, the lover had his way and brought the girl home as his wife. He had mistaken her sour silence for maidenly shyness, her coldness for moral strictness, her obstinacy for character. Marriage undeceived him cruelly. Very soon the gentle man felt the iron hand of a despotic soul upon his neck, and where he had looked for grateful devotion, he met the crassest selfishness. She bore him 2 children, little Nathaniel and his brother Johannes, 8 years older. The latter Hellwig had already, at 11 years of age, placed with a learned kinsman on the Rhine, head of a large boys' school. Such were his domestic circumstances when he received the conjurer's child into his house. The dreadful event he had witnessed had shaken him to the core. He could not forget the imploring, unspeakably sorrowful look of the poor woman as she had stood humiliated in his hall and taken his thaler from his hand. His tender heart suffered under the thought that it might have been precisely in his house that she had felt the last, keenest sting of her unhappy position. So when the Pole told him of her dying wish, he at once offered to bring up the child. It was only when he stepped out into the dark street, while the father's last despairing cry still rang in his ears, and the little one, with her arms tight round his neck, was asking for her mother, that he thought of the resistance awaiting him at home. He counted on the child's charm and on the fact that his own marriage had been denied a daughter. In spite of all experience, he still had no true conception of his wife's character. Otherwise, he would have turned back and restored the child to its father. If his relations with his wife had been cold before, the entrance of the little orphan made it seem as though walls of granite had risen between them. Yet outwardly, nothing changed in the household routine. Mrs. Hellwig made her rounds through house and offices as usual. Her tread had nothing light about it. For a fine or anxious ear, those hard, firm steps were almost a torment. Her right hand passed incessantly over furniture, windowsills, and banisters. It was a fixed habit, almost a mania, that the large white hand, with its blunt fingertips and broad nails, must slide over all surfaces and then inspect its palm for dust or the forbidden thread of a spider's web. Prayers were said as before. The voices praising God's love and mercy droned as monotonously as ever, and the command to love even one's enemies was repeated in the same toneless fashion. Meals were taken in common, and on Sundays the couple walked side by side to church. But Mrs. Hellwig, with iron consistency, avoided addressing her husband. She cut short his attempts at conversation with the briefest answers, and managed always to look past him or over him. No less did the little intruder cease to exist for her. On that stormy evening, she had ordered the cook to prepare one portion more daily, and had a few mattresses and bed linen flung into the maid's room. The small trunk containing Felicitas's belongings, which the servant had fetched from the lova, Friederike had to open under her eye. The child's scrupulously neat little wardrobe, breathing a delicate perfume, was at once carried out to an open gallery to air. Thus began and ended her share in the care of the conjurer's child. As she re-entered her room, the whole matter was inwardly closed for all time. Only once did it seem as though a spark of interest were kindled in her. A seamstress sat in the parlor, sewing 2 frocks for Felicitas out of dark stuff, cut exactly after the mistress's austere pattern. At the same time, Mrs. Hellwig held the struggling little creature between her knees and labored at the beautiful curls with brush, comb, and pomade until the luxuriant ringlets lay sleek and submissive and could be forced into 2 stiff, ugly plaits at the back of the head. Wenn du bereit bist, schick mir Teil 3. Ich lese weiter, unverändert, solange du willst. Her aversion to grace and charm, to everything that offended her ossified notions and drew its lines from the realm of the ideal, was stronger than her resolve to ignore the child's presence. Hellwig could have wept when his little favorite, thus disfigured, came to meet him, while his wife, after the penance demanded by her beauty-hating temper, was even more repellent to the girl than before. Yet as long as he lived, the child was not to be pitied. She could still flee from those Medusa eyes to the shelter of a warm heart. Hellwig loved her as his own. He did not dare to say so openly. His scant store of courage had been exhausted on that evening, but his eye watched her ceaselessly. Like Nathaniel, she had her little corner in his room, where she might rock her dolls and sing over them the melodies she had learned on her mother's knee. Nathaniel did not attend the public school. Private tutors taught him under his father's supervision, And when Felicitas reached her 6th year, she too began her lessons. But as soon as the snow melted and crocuses and snowdrops lined the dark flower beds, Hellwig went out daily with both children to his great garden. There the learning and playing took place. Only at mealtimes did they return to the house on the market. Mrs. Hellwig seldom entered the garden. She preferred to sit with her knitting in the great still room behind the immaculate, evenly pleated curtain, and for this preference she had a particular reason. An ancestor had laid out the grounds in the French style, and a master hand had fashioned the life-size mythological groups scattered through them. The pale figures stood out sharply against the dark yew walls. The charming yet scantily draped Flora, the bare shoulders and arms of the struggling Proserpina, the powerful nakedness of her ravisher, these forms caught every eye that entered. To Mrs. Hellwig they were stones of offense. She had at first imperiously demanded their removal, but Hellwig saved his favorites by producing his father's will, which expressly forbade it. She then caused a wilderness of creepers to be planted about their feet. Before long, Pluto's grim visage appeared beneath a dignified green peruke. One fine morning, however, Heinrich, obeying his master, tore the parasitic growth from the soil with genuine delight. From that day onward, partly for her soul's safety, partly because the statues remained ironical witnesses of her defeat, Mrs. Hellwig carefully avoided the garden. It thus became, in truth, the little Felicitas's own domain. Beyond the yew hedges, a wide lawn opened. Huge walnut trees sank their trunks deep into the flower-speckled grass. A foaming mill stream cut across the green, its banks fringed with hazel. The low turf dam, thrown up against the floods of spring, gleamed yellow with cowslips in May, and later the crimson eyes of wild pinks peeped between the waving blades. Felicitas studied untiringly, and sat with a strangely controlled bearing during the hours of instruction. But when Hellwig in the late afternoon closed his books, she changed in an instant. Flushed with zeal, she seemed intoxicated with freedom. Again and again, she ran over the grass under the walnut trees, aimless, unrestrained, in a wild grace like a young horse of the steppe. In a flash, she would be up the trunk of a walnut, her head, surrounded by flying hair, suddenly appearing high among the branches. Then again, lying below on the bank of the brook, her hands folded under her head, gazing into the green twilight of the leaves above, and dreaming those bright, deceptive images of world and future, which are woven in every lively child's brain out of fairy tales and its own imagination. The water murmured past, the sunbeams danced on its surface and filtered through the hazels like half-veiled eyes of fire. Bees and bumblebees hummed, and butterflies, which had languished among the carefully tended exotics of the front garden, found their promised land here and clung fearlessly to the blossoms just beside the child's cheek. Sometimes fantastically shaped white clouds sailed above the treetops. Then a mysterious past rose before the brooding child. White and shining, too, had her mother's robe been. Candlelight had gleamed upon its milky folds as it flowed, strewn with flowers, over what Felicitas had taken for a narrow bed. She still marveled that Mamma had held flowers in her hands, yet given her not one. She pondered why they had not allowed her that day to wake her mother with kisses, as she had done every morning before. She did not know that the beloved face which had bent in passionate tenderness over her was moldering beneath the earth. Hellwig had never dared to tell her the truth. Though she no longer wept so wildly for her parents as in the first years, she spoke of them with touching love and clung with unshaken faith to her foster father's ambiguous promise that she should see them again one day. She knew as little of her father's calling. This, too, he had desired, and Hellwig was strict that no one in the house should speak of the past. He never thought that the kindly veil he held before her eyes might one day fall from his own hand. He did not think of his own death. Yet death had long been walking beside him, silent and sure. His disease of the chest was incurable, but like so many such sufferers, he cherished the firmest hopes of life. Already he must be wheeled in a chair through his beloved garden, and still he called it a passing weakness, no hindrance to his grand projects of building and travel. One afternoon, Dr. Boehm entered his room. The invalid sat at his desk, writing busily. Cushions wedged behind him in the armchair supported the wasted frame. "Hey there!" cried the doctor, brandishing his stick. "What kind of extravagance is this? Who in the hangman's name gave you leave to write? Lay down that pen at once." Hellwig turned, a cheerful smile on his lips. "There you have your eternal example," he said lightly. "Doctor and death go hand in hand. I was just writing to the boy, Johannes, about little Fee, and in the very moment you come into the house, I find myself, for the first time in all my life, putting the word death into a letter in connection with myself." The doctor bent down and read aloud, "I think highly of your character, Johannes, and should therefore unconditionally entrust to you the care of the child committed to me, should I leave this world before." "Enough! Not another word of that today," he said, pushing open a drawer and laying the half-finished letter inside. Then he took the invalid's pulse, and his glance stole to the two round crimson spots burning on the prominent cheekbones. "You are like a child, Hellwig," he scolded. "I have but to turn my back, and you are sure to be up to some folly. And you tyrannize over me shamefully. But wait, by next May I shall run away from you, and then you may chase me to Switzerland if you please." Next day, the windows of the sick room in the Hellwig house stood wide open. A penetrating scent of musk floated into the street, and a man in mourning dress went from door to notify the town's leading men, in the name of the grieving widow, that Mr. Hellwig had, an hour ago, departed this life.